Greetings and welcome to the Adeptus Artorum YouTube channel. I'm your host for today's video, Karos Retinue, and today I aim to continue my ongoing content on the Unification Wars. My previous videos and shorts have mainly focused on the surviving Thunder Warriors of the Unification Wars, and if you haven't seen those videos and it sounds like something you'd be interested in, they'll be linked at the end of this video. But for today's video I wanted to focus on a topic and a character that I feel is very relevant, specifically to the ancient history of Earth within the lore of 40k, and more specifically the most direct link to the latest part of pre-imperial history available. It serves as must-know information for those of us who wish to understand how the Imperium came to power, and most of the content discussed in this video can be found within Part 2, Chapter 6 of Dan Abnett's novel Horus Rising. If you haven't read it, I'd strongly suggest it. It's a great novel with a lot of interesting content that leaves you wondering, yet helps to fill some gaps. Okay, all that in mind, let's get into it. Long before the Great Crusade and the rise of the Imperium, Terra was a war-torn world, ravaged by mutants, Techno-Barbarians, and their warlord Tyrants. They were fighting over the scraps left behind after the galaxy-spanning conflict known as the Cybernetic Revolt. The revolt consisted of the Men of Iron, which were artificially intelligent humanoid machines created by humanity to serve as their military force and to assist with laborious tasks, and of course their creators, an ancient interstellar human empire that existed for thousands of years before the Imperium. The Men of Iron turned against their human creators and nearly wiped humanity out throughout the galaxy, and though we were able to eventually defeat them, the cost to humanity was great, pushing us into the dark timeline that we now know as the Age of Strife. Among the countless tyrants forging their new nations in the ruins of the old world, one name stood above all the others: Kalagann of Ursh. Kalagann ruled the vast territories of Ursh with an iron fist. It was a brutal old Earth nation state, spanning the steppes of what was once Russia, Serbia and Central Asia. It flourished during the Age of Strife. The tyrant Kalagann was well documented within historical texts written by unknown authors whose writing predated imperial history, named the Chronicles of Ursh. The chronicles detailed the rise and reign of Kalagann and the wars of Ursh against another Techno-Barbarian conclave known as the Nordafric Conclaves, a nation of Techno-Barbarians that encompassed the territory that we know today as North Africa. The chronicles were extremely graphic and violent, and they described scenes of absolute destruction and devastation. Kalagann would order long-forgotten cities to be sacked and burned. In extreme cases, he would evaporate them in nuclear fallout. Through all the bloodshed that Kalagann and the Ursh would spill, what little was left of the seas of old Earth were stained crimson with blood. The landscape of Terra was nothing but bones bleached in the sun as far as the eye could see, and the air was filled with soot and ash, making a clean breath impossible. Warp storms freely raged in the sky above the endless bloodshed, and to help him carve out his nation in the blood and fire stood his three generals. His use of these warriors was akin to how the Emperor used the Primarchs in the Horus Heresy. They were warriors of unmatched skill and ferocity at the time, and there was nothing on Terra that had come close to matching their brutal onslaught. Lertois, Shenkal and Qualadon. Now, though a clear despot, Kalagann was no mere warlord. The chronicles detailed both his cruelty and the cruelty of his generals, in action and in character. Out of the three generals that were instrumental to Ursh's rise to power, the only one that has been documented in a way that helps us understand his character is Shenkal. Known within the Chronicles of Ursh as the Campaigner of the South, he was credited with the leadership of multiple pre-unification military units tied to Ursh. The Tupolov Lancers, which were essentially close combat shock cavalry that would arrive into battle screaming. Red Engines, which were heavy assault engines used to assault fortifications and burn down fertile landscapes and regions. And Wrath Singers, Psyker units who served Ursh by manipulating the warp to gain the upper hand in their many conflicts. This is just to name a few. Now, during the invasion of the Nordafric conclaves, Shenkal led a large invasion force into the southern Techno-Barbarian conclaves, motivated mainly by jealousy of the tales he's heard of their technological prowess and superiority. He assembled high and irregular levies from client states of Ursh to heavily augment his forces, before fighting 8 major conflicts, which eventually result in the destruction of an almost Eden-like paradise hidden away named Zoza. To bring it to its knees, Shenkal sent first his Red Siege engines, which smashed Zoza's defences. He then followed through to send his Psykers to unleash hellish warp phenomena for the final destruction of its sanctuaries, possessing its inhabitants with warp entities, and the Wrathsingers countered any and all resistance sent to defend the oasis. Though we don't have such specific information for the other 2 generals, Shenkal is knowledge enough to go on when considering how they may have been as characters, likely brutal, vicious and corrupted by the warp. As a master conqueror, Kalagann's armies marched in numbers of up to 1 billion, all clad in black, carrying the rugged banners bearing the symbolism of Ursh, and burning all that stood in their way to ash. As an opportunist, Kalagann enjoyed keeping company with powerful, unpredictable Psykers, and a mass number of these made up the majority of his ranks, leading most to plausibly theorise that the Chaos Gods were behind Kalagann's ascent to power and the main driving force behind the nation of Ursh. Vast and disciplined and supported by his powerful Psykers, he and his generals regularly used warp-born atrocities as weapons of mass destruction. Through his conquest, Ursh became one of the most formidable powers on Terra, and it was thought that nothing could stop Kalagann as he declared himself the warlord of the world. Now, I quote the famous phrase that we all must eventually come to understand and accept. That being that all good things must come to an end, and this includes Kalagann and his generals. For as Kalagann and his generals reverted the landscape of Terra to barbarism, something was rising from the ashes of the old world. A patient, godlike figure. The Emperor of Mankind. Emerging from the shadows of history, he set into motion the Unification Wars, a relentless campaign to bring every Terran nation, every warlord, every remnant of shattered humanity beneath a single rule, his own. On the blood-soaked steppes of Ursh, the Emperor's Thunder Warriors clashed with the armies of Kalagann, the self-proclaimed warlord of the world. The battle that followed was one of the most brutal and catastrophic of the age for Kalagann, a war of gene-forged giants and warp-touched soldiers fought amid the ruins of ancient civilization. Though Kalagann's mastery of forbidden technology and his legions of Psykers had previously stood undefeated, and in their billions they couldn't even begin to stand against the onslaught brought down by the Emperor and his Thunder Warriors. In the end, the warlord of Ursh was felled by his betters. The Emperor saw to it that Ursh burned, and on its ashes now stands the Imperium of Mankind. With Kalagann's death, the last great tyrant of Old Night was no more. His fall marked the end of the Techno-Barbarian age and the dawn of the Imperium of Man. In the current age, only one relic of that time period endured, the Armour of Pearl. The Armour of Pearl was a gleaming warplate that Kalagann himself wore into his final battle. By the time of the Horus Heresy, the armour rested in the shadow of the Eternity Gate within the Imperial Palace on Terra, and it likely remained there in the 41st millennium, displayed as a trophy of the Emperor's triumph over Ursh. As a closing statement, I will say this. Kalagann of Ursh was more than just a warlord, he was the final symbol of mankind's fractured past. His fall marks the moment when barbarism gave way to the Imperium, and when the dream of unity marched its long, bloody march across the surface of Terra. In Kalagann's defeat, the Emperor proved that no king, no god, and no tyrant could stand against his vision for the Imperium and humanity's future. Okay guys, If you've enjoyed this dive into the forgotten wars of old Terra, please make sure to leave a like, subscribe and ring the Vox bell to stay tuned for all future video content. I've been your host for today's video, Karos Retinue, and as always, I thank you guys so much for watching.